The second international break of the season is already here, and it gives us a chance to reflect on Arsenal's start to the season, but as well it gives us a chance to look at our rivals. And in this episode, I'm going to be analysing Liverpool and Manchester City's start to the season and just discussing whether they can rival us for the Premier League title this year. This is Arsenal Unfiltered. Let's get started. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Arsenal Unfiltered, your 3 times a week dose of Arsenal coverage with me, your host Mark, wherever you are in the world. I hope you are well and I hope you are not suffering too much from the lack of Arsenal across the international break. It's a second one so early in the year for another international break. I really dislike them, but here we are. I mean, next year we are going to suffer through a really long international break. So rather than having 2, we're going to have like a 4-week one, which I'm not looking forward to in any way, shape or form. But c'est la vie, we are at the whims and the mercy of UEFA and FIFA. And hey, maybe it will be better and maybe it will be less disruptive to the start of the Premier League campaign. Today, as you heard at the top, I'm going to be talking about Manchester City and Liverpool. Bit of a different episode. Usually I'm very keen to keep this an Arsenal-focused podcast, but I really, we've got an opportunity with this being the international break to broaden where we're looking, have a look at some of the other teams, and whilst, people were chatting about Chelsea at the start of the year, and obviously there's always that rubbish from Tottenham fans that they might be in it now that they've got Thomas Frank and all of that sort of stuff. The real rivals Arsenal have for the title are Manchester City and Liverpool, and most would argue that before the season, Liverpool were the favourites. I think the bookies have now all made Arsenal the favourites following the recent results for Liverpool. And some of their struggles, and Manchester City struggles at the start of the season as well. So going to be looking at all of that today. A couple of housekeeping bits to start. Unfortunately, I am in a different recording space, so it might sound a little bit different today. I do apologise for that, and we'll be like this for a couple of days, but we'll be back to normal come next week. So thank you for bearing with me with that. And the other thing to call out, guys, is to say that I'm going to be bringing you podcasts 3 times a week, continuing through the international break. So make sure that you hit follow wherever you get your podcasts from to make sure you're not bored and you're not having to suffer just watching England play football or your country, wherever you are from. If you like international football, fair play to you, but I feel like the standard is dropping all the time. So make sure you hit follow and you will have some football content that you can enjoy over this international break. Right, let's get started then. And I want to talk about Manchester City first of all, because they have been, for so long the dominant force in English football and have been a shining light to Arsenal and Liverpool, really, as to how we want to play. Liverpool have challenged them, we've challenged them, but over the years they have been the team to beat. And it feels like for the first time in a long time, even with the way last season panned out and them not really being in it, I think at the start of the season, everyone felt Manchester City would be there, and it feels like for the first time in a long time, they're not in everyone's top 2. Even before the start of the season, the top 2 were going to be Liverpool and Arsenal, and it has kind of transpired that way so far. We sit first and second. Manchester City sit in 5th after a run of kind of indifferent results, I guess is the way I would describe it. They have won 4 games, drawn 1 and lost 2. The defeats that they've had were sloppy. They lost their normal game that they lose against Tottenham for some reason, but they also lost to Brighton very late on, drew against us of course, but then also toiled in a couple of games that really you wouldn't expect them to toil in. Brentford, the most recent game, they won 1-0 and didn't look great. They also dropped points in the Champions League to Monaco. So they've had an average start to the season. Probably, genuinely thinking about it, their best result, and the one they're probably most excited about, is the 1-1 against us, because they know that we can go to the we will be going away to them in the next fixture, and they've kind of got themselves a point there. It's a bit of a bonus point, I think, at this point. So it's a real mixed start for Manchester City. One thing I would say is they look really special when Erling Haaland is playing well. And that is not not something new. That's not new analysis for you. But Erling Haaland, he said recently he is in the form of his life, and it feels like every time they find him in and around the goal, he's putting it away. 9 goals so far in the Premier League for Erling Haaland. I saw an amazing stat the other day that by the time he'd scored 5 goals in the Premier League, and I think it was 5 goals in 4 games, that was his worst ever start to a Premier League campaign. That's how lethal he's been. But he's speaking about he's recently had a child, and that's making him play even better football, because when he goes home, he just doesn't think about football anymore. So I think there is a premium on goals in the Premier League at the moment. The saying used to be, defence wins you titles, and it still can, I think. It still can, but there is a real value to having an elite forward. Manchester City have had Haaland for a few years now, and he has bullied them to a couple of titles. And last year, of course, we saw a season unlike many others from Mohamed Salah at Liverpool, and again, he dug them out of a hole a couple of times, actually. And I think we forget that about last year. Last year, Liverpool was superb, but Mo Salah was the absolute pinnacle of that team. And Manchester City, feel like they're having a season like that again, where Haaland is just electric, and when you've got a player like that up front, sometimes you can concede 2 in a game. You can look a bit sloppy or not look at your best, and just get the ball to that guy once, maybe twice, and he gets you 3 points. And that is how it feels like Manchester City's season will go. If they can keep Erling Haaland fit, these guys will be right up there at the end of the season, because that's just the premium that there is on goals at the moment in the Premier League. I really, truly believe that it is the hardest job in football, scoring goals, but I also believe that with the way modern football is, and the way teams will allow you to dominate possession, a lot of teams in the Premier League allow other teams to dominate possession, you will be able to fashion chances, especially for a player like Erling Haaland, who is big and is physical and can hurt you in so many ways. You will be able to fashion chances for them. And I think, going back to an Arsenal point of view, we've seen many, many low blocks against us where we've been able to create chances, but we haven't been able to finish them. And that's been a big problem. You think back to multiple games against the likes of West Ham, Southampton, where we've had the chances and just not got it done, and been caught out at the other end with a silly mistake, and that's it. That's game over. But because we haven't had that player who can get us, that extra goal, the second goal, the third goal, just to give you that safety blanket, we haven't taken maximum points, and it's hurt us in title runs. Erling Haaland is a player who will just go and get goals. But the problem for Manchester City, and it's the problem that they saw last year when they were so reliant on Rodri, is that if Erling Haaland was to get injured, they have a severe problem in my book. So far in the Premier League, Erling Haaland has 9 goals for Manchester City. There are 4 other goal scorers: Núñez, Foden, Cherki, Reinders. Cherki is out injured, by the way. So there's only 3 other fit goal scorers. And they all have 1 apiece. I don't see where the goals are coming from in this team. I don't think Marmoush is fit at the moment either. So if Erling Haaland suddenly drops off, or gets injured, or gets disrupted in any way, shape or form, they have a real problem, because they're not spreading their goals amongst their team. And I think, give Liverpool their credit. They were probably looking at the Mohamed Salah season last year and thinking, thank you very much, Mohamed. But we don't think that you're going to be able to do that again. So we're going to bring in Ekitike, we're going to bring in Salah, and we're going to reinforce that area to make sure that the inevitable drop-off for Mo Salah, which, I think people are overreacting to massively, because he was always going to drop off this year. 1, age catches up with you, but 2, last year was an absolute outlier for so many stats for Mo Salah. It was a wonderful season. They've come in and said, that's going to happen, we accept that, and we were going to reinforce you with these players who, they've started okay. Isak's not really got going yet, but Ekitike scored a number of goals, and Gakpo's pitching in with some goals as well. So they have that backup. I don't think Manchester City have that backup. I'm trying to think of their squad, the players in their team that I'd be like, they will step up when, if and when Erling Haaland is not available. Marmoush is probably the player, but like I say, he's injured, hasn't been available for a little while. Doku, Savinho, Foden, Silva, fantastic players, but principally creators, right? Not principally finishers. And genuinely, after that, we don't know how good Reinders is going to be at kind of attacking the ball and getting into good scoring positions. He's had a good start, but whether he's a lethal midfield finisher, that's yet to be seen. I can't see where the rest of the goals are coming from. So Manchester City, I think absolutely as a team they've had an okay start. But they've looked maybe better than their general play is because of the quality of Erling Haaland. And I think it is very simple analysis. If he stays fit and stays, even semi-engaged with what Manchester City are doing, it won't matter that they can't keep Rodri fit at the moment. It won't matter that really at fullback, I think they look pretty poor. Kusanov, O'Reilly, goodish players, but not elite players, not to the level Manchester City have had. So I think it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how poor those areas of their team look, how porous their defence looks at times. They've got Erling Haaland, and by the way, they've also got Donnarumma, who, I watched the Manchester derby earlier this year, and a wonderful save from Donnarumma, and that we know just how painful his goalkeeping can be when he did a lot against us when he was still at PSG. So they've got players at the end of the pitch for Manchester City, both ends of the pitch, I should say, who can really cause the opposition issues. Doesn't matter that they can't seem to keep Rodri fit. So I think Manchester City are in a good place and will start to surge up the table over the next few games, really, when we come back to Premier League football. Liverpool, however, it's an interesting one with Liverpool because they have started really well. 5 wins, 2 defeats. It's actually an okay start, but it's the way that all of that has happened. And I'm going to say it, I've watched Liverpool a lot this year. I tend to gravitate towards watching the games where our rivals are playing. And, you've only got so much time to watch football in a week. Obviously, 2 of those games are taken up by Arsenal. And then I tend to always try and prioritise our main rivals, figure out how they're playing, see what they're doing. And I must say, the most impressed I've been with Liverpool this year is the game they played against us, because it was the only game that I've seen from them where Konate and Van Dijk looked like they had ever played together. It really does sometimes look like Van Dijk is doing it on his own and Konate is wobbling a lot. It was the game where it looked like that right-back solution with Szoboszlai was the most effective. It was the only game I've watched where the left-back scenario didn't feel like an absolute disaster class. I think we saw them at their very best against us, and in other games, I really think they have struggled. The Bournemouth game was one that I watched. They obviously kicked off the Premier League on that Friday night, and they were good, to be fair, Liverpool, but they, similar to the way they were in the Community Shield, at about 60th, 70th minute, they kind of ran out of puff, and Bournemouth kind of punched them in the mouth, and they got quite lucky at the end that they managed to get those late goals through Chiesa, and then Salah, I think, got a kind of a cherry on top. Against Newcastle, I really didn't think Liverpool looked particularly special at all. They got that wonderful finish from Rio and Gamoa at the end, but for me it felt like they had stolen a lead at half time, and Newcastle really should have put them away. If Anthony Gordon doesn't make such a silly tackle, that is a curtains, that game. Obviously, the game against us was a worldie. They got a late penalty against Burnley, a late winner against Atletico Madrid. Everton was a more simple game, a late winner in the Cup against Southampton, and then it all started to fall apart. The late winners started to go the other way, where Chelsea and Crystal Palace have recently beaten them with late winners, and Galatasaray beat them in the Champions League as well. So 3 defeats in a week for Liverpool. And look, there is this ongoing, ever raging debate of, are late winners a sign that you haven't done enough during the game, or are they the sign of champions? I think my take on it is, if you're playing well and the opposition team are playing well and you manage to get a late winner, that's the sign of champions. But if you are playing poorly against generally poor teams, or 10 men like they were against Newcastle, and you're not able to get it done until the very last moment, that's getting away with it. And I do think that that's the difference. And the kind of the champions mentality of late goals was born out of Alex Ferguson's teams in the 2000s, when it felt like Manchester United would always get a late winner. But I must admit, I never think back and think, they were terrible in those games. Maybe they just didn't have their finishing boots on, but it never felt like an Alex Ferguson team was getting run through and was so open and vulnerable in the way that the Liverpool team is. So there's a lot going on with these late winners. I think the emotional toil of them will have a really, really big effect going forward, because they've just started their season on such a knife edge, really, haven't they? Whereas Arsenal have maybe had some boring games. The West Ham game, the Nottingham Forest game, are maybe not what Arsenal fans want to see. We want to see us putting 5 goals away like we did against Leeds. But they are simple games. And I wonder, with the way Liverpool play and the kind of basketball games that they love to engineer, I wonder if that's sustainable over multiple seasons. And I feel like it isn't this season, because they haven't brought the players that you need to be able to do that. One of the key things that helped them be so successful with that system last year was the distribution of Trent from right back, because even though it was a bit of a basketball game at times against Liverpool last year, they had a player that they could pop it to, who would then send a ball over the top to Salah or cross field to Diaz and really threaten the opposition. I don't think they've got that this year, and I think it's making them less of a threat going forward, but also less of a threat on the transition. So teams are maybe not as vulnerable to Liverpool as they were, and I think this stat that I've found as well has a really, really key showing as to why Liverpool are potentially vulnerable. So I'm brought up the tackles for, or the defensive actions, I should say, for Arsenal, Liverpool and Manchester City across the thirds. You can do this on FB Ref, so you can go and look for yourself. Very similar numbers for the attacking third across all 3 teams. 2.29 tackles per 90 for Manchester City, 2.14 for Liverpool, and 2.86 for Arsenal. So slightly ahead for Arsenal, but essentially all 3 of these teams are going to try and hurt you in the attacking third. They're going to try and make tackles and win the ball high up there. They're not going to drop off. It's not quite as high as some other teams, but that's probably due to the number of tackles that Arsenal and Manchester City and Liverpool have to make, because they have the ball so much. They make less tackles per game than teams that have less. But, very similar numbers between those 3 teams. In the defensive third, very similar numbers as well. 6.86 for Arsenal, 6.57 for Manchester City, and 7 tackles per 90 for Liverpool in the defensive third. But the main difference here, and I think this is why Liverpool are quite so vulnerable, Arsenal, middle third, tackles per 90, 6.43. Manchester City, 5.57, so fairly similar. Liverpool, 3.86. They just cannot stop teams getting through them. And when they lose the ball high up the pitch, they are counted on over and over again. And, this is something Newcastle did really well against them. They moved the ball through their midfield very, very quickly. And they just don't have the players, right? We lauded I'm not sure we did as Arsenal fans, but the media lauded this midfield last year of McAllister, Gravenberch and Szoboszlai. Szoboszlai's had to play at right back a lot, so they've had Wirtz in there. Wirtz certainly doesn't feel like a good fit for that midfield at the moment. Gravenberch at 6 is good, but it's good when you're dominating teams. If a team is trying to throw a punch back, I don't think he holds a candle to the likes of Zubimendi, Rice, Rodri in the other squads. And McAllister, again, a really good player. I'm not saying these guys are not great players. They are, but I think their profiles are very different. They don't have a player who is like a Rodri, like a Rice, who can just eat up ground and eat up other players and disrupt and break up attacks. So their midfield is very porous, and Florian Wirtz is only making that worse. So for me, I guess, to kind of bring this together, I think there are real issues across both of the other squads. Manchester City, if they don't have Haaland, if Haaland drops off, they have a real scoring problem. I just don't see where the goals are going to come from, which is an odd thing to say for Manchester City, isn't it? But they don't look like they've got anyone else in form at the moment to score them goals and get them points when they need them. Liverpool, very, very porous midfield. They've used a lot of emotional energy already this season, and I just feel their performances and their results have not matched up. The results have been far better than the performances, and they've been in basketball matches which sometimes they've won, and over the recent weeks they've lost them. And that's just the way that it is when you play that kind of football. You live on a knife edge, and it could go your way one week and could not go your way the next week. So am I saying that these 2 teams can compete with us for the title? Absolutely. quality squads, quality squads with quality players. Haaland, Diaz, Donnarumma for City, Salah, Isak, and Van Dijk for Liverpool. These are players who could get into any squad. They are outrageously good footballers. You throw Alisson in there as well. You maybe throw Rodri in there as well, depending on his fitness issues. So there is tons of talent in these two teams, and they have two fantastic managers as well. It would be naive of Arsenal to say that these guys are not going to be in the title race, but I do think there are just a couple of weaknesses there, which hopefully we will be able to exploit, or more accurately, I guess, other teams will exploit for us, and we will be able to carry on getting our boring 2-0 and 3-0 victories. Look, the Arsenal have flaws of our own, but we talk about that all the time. So I thought it would be a nice opportunity to speak about the other teams and kind of just analyse where we should be looking. If we're kind of hopeful this season that these teams are going to drop off, where are we looking? What are we looking for? And where can we see some joy coming from Liverpool and Manchester City? So hopefully, when the Premier League returns, we see maybe some of those exploited even more. Maybe Haaland has a bad patch and defenders work out how to deal with him. Maybe teams realise we can run through this Liverpool midfield and expose them and get on top of them quite easily. So hopefully those are things that the other Premier League managers are looking at, and we can just go about and do our business. Like I said at the start, guys, make sure you follow to keep yourself entertained this international break. I'll be bringing you more over this period, so keep an eye out and hit follow to make sure that you see all of those podcasts come through. I'm going to be looking at some of the players and how they do over the international break and keeping you up to date with that. And we might even have an episode with a guest on, which will be exciting. Hopefully bringing that forward to you next week. Guys, I'm missing Arsenal already. I hope you guys aren't missing them too badly, but they will be back very, very soon. We play Fulham on the 18th, and I will be covering that game as well, so keep an eye out for that. That's all there is to say. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you for following. Thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.